I'm sure you know, but there are quite a few like brands and fashion. I don't know, schools that see you as a like a real leader, like a certain fashion icon. You know, like acronym is maybe a big one. Has that role surprised you? Did you ever think that you would be like the leader of, of an aesthetic movement as well as a literary one?
No, I mean, oh man, see, how can I rephrase that? It's a good question, but I can't rephrase that. Actually, I'll attempt to rephrase it during my response, because that's really my MO. But I don't think there are quite a few. There seems to be some possibility that I inspired the people who the very funny group of branding thinkers who coined the term normcore. I'll cop to that, and they're very funny, but otherwise. I don't think I'm influencing much. I may be partially responsible for the resurgence in people wearing MA1 pattern U.S. Air Force jackets, and without having to worry about being mistaken for skinheads. So I may have, and I'm happy with that. I've somehow got that great iconic American military streetwear thing out of the hands of racists and white supremacists. More power to me. Oh yes, okay.
In a recent interview, you mentioned the question was brought up about the singularity, and you used an interesting phrase. You said that you believe that we may be living in a half-assed singularity right now. Maybe that's the only one that it's possible for us to create as human beings. So I wanted you to expound on that a little bit.
Well, see, I can't rephrase it. I just can't do that thing. But my understanding of Werner Vinge's, quite brilliant concept of the singularity is that we will at some point create an emergent technology whose disruptive effect will be so complete that the meaning of everything will change, and that nothing beyond the point of the singularity, nothing that happens beyond it, would be even remotely comprehensible to us if we could see it. We just go, I don't know. And that's brilliant. But that's not the way the singularity idea has been interpreted in popular culture and business culture. How we use it, it's more like we're going to keep doing technology until we do some technology that just fixes everything. And it's like all cool, and we can all live forever, and it doesn't cost anything to make a beautiful hamburger out of a little pile of shit, and there won't be any more money, and that is like that's like a religious concept. It's the it's just not. Anyway, I always found that annoyed me because I don't see human beings as particularly heroic critters, and I don't see our technology generally as being particularly heroic, except that we're too thick to understand that. Except we're starting to get it now. We're starting to get the message. And so whenever I've found it handy to use a singularity-like concept, I've gone for one that I thought of as being, well, it's a singularity, but it's totally half-assed. And it makes some things better and it fucks some things totally up. Because that's us. And I get, I guess that's my response to that. But thank you, it's a good question. Yes, right there.
Thank you. Character names. How much time do you spend on them? How much should we read into them?
It depends. It depends. In some, I can spend a lot of time on finding a character name that works for me. That, becomes, as soon as I think of it, for me, becomes the name of the character. And that's what I'm after. They aren't constructed as any kind of a form of code to be interpreted by somebody doing a master's thesis. Not that will stop them. They can be kind of off the wall, or they can have private meanings. For instance, Chase, the protagonist of Neuromancer, when Molly is not being the protagonist of Neuromancer, his full name is Henry Dorset Case, and his middle name is Dorset, after my very good friend who I knew when I was writing Neuromancer, Richard Dorset, who's an Austin guy, and who I met down here, and is long gone now. I did that as like just a shout out to liking Richard, but I don't know what the Henry means. It just kind of fits. But Case, for some reason, whenever I typed it, I thought of the Case knife logo, and it's an iconic old brand of Japanese, or rather American knives, and actually to the extent that around the time Huckleberry Finn was written, Case knife with the C in lowercase was synonymous with pocket knife or folding knife. So it was one of the very first mass manufactured pocket knives. But it doesn't mean anything except to me. Yes?
My Kindle tells me I'm 54% of the way through your book, Agency.
Wow.
So I don't want you to give anything away, but I'm fascinated by this idea of the stub or stubs. Is there anything you can say about that?
Well, have you read The Peripheral?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, you're a brave soul then, because the and Agency. Well, you could let me know, but I'm hoping it's capable of fully acting as a standalone novel, so that you don't have to have read the previous book. But in The Peripheral, I go into The Peripheral necessarily has to go much more into what the stubs are, and it's an idea of time travel of sorts, creating a very specific kind of alternate reality, and it was based on an idea that was conceived here in Austin, Texas, by Bruce Sterling and Louis Shiner back in the 80s in a story they wrote together called Mozart in Mirror Shades. And in that story, it's set like it's got like Wolf Mozart is a character in it back in his day, and except in his particular version of his day, these Americans have arrived in this big time machine with all this heavy equipment, and they're strip mining his world. They're extracting resources, and they just like take everything and cut down all the trees, eventually go back through the time portal, leaving the mess that they've created. And so Wolf's being colonized by the future. But the thing that I found essentially valuable about Bruce and Lou's idea was that they posited that once the time portal opens in our past, back in our past, there's a split, because it's like an insult to the space-time, the fabric of space and time. So that world goes off on its own alternate time stream, which gets rid of all of that tedious paradox stuff. I can't stand. I love time travel stories, but I can't stand that stuff. And but my version of it, which I worked out in the peripheral, is that the way you create an alternate time track is there's a magical server off stage that's never explained, but you use that server to send an email to the past. You're sending it to your own past, but when the email is received in your own past, the insult occurs and there's a split. So thereafter, when you email the past, you're talking to people in what people who do this, who are essentially hobbyists in the future, call a stub. And they've been deflected. So nothing you've done and nothing they do will change anything here. They're going off in their own direction. And what's happened in agency, I guess I can say this. This spoiler thing makes me nervous. Is that someone has done that, and with the particular result that there is a stub 2017 that differs in certain historical ways from our 2017, because something happened, things didn't happen the same way in 2016. And I think the person who did it, I think was, if I can remember it even, they emailed 2015, so they had a bit of a running start. But that becomes apparent pretty early in the book, so I don't. It's not too spoilery, I hope. Yes.
You said, or you've been quoted as saying that the future is here; it's just unevenly distributed.
Yeah.
Can we discuss that a little bit? Where do you see advancement? Where do you see trailing off? And what do you see as being most advanced right now?
Well, I think, that's probably, the future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed. It's probably the most quoted thing I've ever said. And I still believe it's true, but it doesn't allow me in my personal use of it to have anything like a corporate futurists view of what's going on. So it isn't like I've got this formula that allows me, to look at the news feed today and go, oh yes, I see where that's going. No, it's not that. It's just that as I walk around in the world with everybody else, I sometimes notice things that I think, wow, I wonder, there's a new thing. Somebody just put this thing on the market. What are people going to do with it? They won't. My observation has been that the people who invent and develop and market technology, by and large, have no idea what it's actually going to change. The Alexander Graham Bell did not foresee payphones being removed from certain neighborhoods in a useless attempt to try to slow down drug dealing. People who invent most forms of media don't realize that one of its first uses, any media's first use, is pornography. So like, and that's kind of that attitude is sort of where I work from in the part of my work that passes for futurology. So it's pretty rough and ready, but having used it for a long time, whenever I hear anyone giving a TED talk where they explain what's going to happen, it's kind of like, yeah. Yes. Yeah.
It's like when you mentioned case knives earlier, you seem to have this really fine sense of physical items, and it shows up in the things you mentioned in your books. How intentional is that, or is it just kind of part of your personality?
I think it's part of my personality, but it was also part of I had a list of things when I started writing that I was unsatisfied with in science fiction by and large. Things that bugged me. Like one was that the future was always essentially the United States, which is, so taken for granted a part of American science fiction that we don't even notice it. But another was how poorly and really how negligently the physical reality of the imagined futures were described. Nothing, I had a quote from a science fiction story, maybe by Asimov. It was by somebody who's quite a respected SF writer. It was something like that. He looked out the window and saw the silver boots of the prone space cadet, or something like that. And so I get there and I go like, silver boots. Okay, like go-go? Or maybe like, knight's armor shoes? Like, what are, is it patent leather? It's just like no thought. And Asimov wouldn't have known, and he wouldn't even have understood my frustration. I wanted to up the specific thingness of imaginary things. And I can't, to this day, I feel like I can't write effectively about something unless I've done the work of visualizing it to my own satisfaction, which usually means in more detail than prose fiction requires. So, I try not to be completely over the top. Probably not entirely successfully, but it's in a way, it's part of a program of, I was a typical huge science fiction reader when I was 13 years old. And then, like 10 or 15 years later, I was finally getting around to getting a university degree. And I was an English honors BA student at the University of British Columbia. And I was learning about the history of the novel. And what I realized that a big part of what science fiction missed from the history of the development of the novel is naturalism. And naturalism even back in the early 80s just wasn't very common in science fiction. So I wanted to up the naturalism in every way. But naturalism in the novel hasn't been like literary novels hasn't been a rad, sexy concept since like the 1800s. When it was, and that was really, and people French guys started writing novels that were like, people thought about sex, or they actually had to use the toilet, or, just everything that people do. And I really wanted to do that. And I won't go on through the whole list, but I had this kind of Post-it notes in my head for like more of this, less of that. Yes.
Where can I get a copy of that list?
I've never actually written it down. there are probably interviews where I go into more, go into a few more items, but the biggest one is just literary naturalism. It's still offensive, I think, to, well, I don't know, I can't speak for today's readers so much, but readers of genre SF my age don't necessarily crave naturalism in a science fiction novel, nor surrealism. I was kind of like more surrealism. And surrealism and naturalism, both at once. It's what I really like. Yes.
Great dismal, all honor. So, regarding our current political situation, it seems like the powers of authoritarianism seem to leverage the tools of technology better than forces of democracy. Do you see that reversing or moving that way?
Well, I do the powers, do authoritarian powers leverage the tools of the information age more effectively than those of us who aren't authoritarian powers? Yeah, well, it's working. I think right now it's working better for them. What that takes me back to is after Neuromancer had been published and the internet was really getting going, and we were kind of in the beginning of the World Wide Web, I was always meeting people, particularly if I went to virtual reality conferences hosted by seemingly every developed nation in the world for a while. Meeting these people who were really happy to meet me because of the stuff I wrote about. and yet seemed to have no idea that anything I read about had any sort of potential downside. And I couldn't understand it. And later I thought, well, maybe it's like those, like kids who are, there are always some kids somewhere in America who are like, conservative, right-wing kids who are just flat out shocked to realize that Bruce Springsteen is a big liberal. and they probably never do get it that Born in the USA is one of the most tragic dirges ever written about the United States, which you can, if you don't believe me, listen to him do it solo on a non-electric guitar, and like listen to the words. But so I meet these people who somehow could read me and without listening to the words, and they'd see the stuff, but they wouldn't hear the lyric. And all of those people said that all of this stuff that they wanted to make was going to totally free things up, and they weren't. I don't think they weren't at all envisioning what we're now seeing can be done to us with that technology. But I was, to some extent. I mean, I didn't see. I thought Neuromancer was actually an optimistic book because at the time I wrote it, it seemed to me, most intelligent people on the planet expected the world to end at any time, virtually overnight, by the United States and the Soviet Union screwing up with this giant mutually assured destruction machine they built. And we now know, years after the Soviet Union has fallen apart, that on at least one occasion it came down to one Soviet colonel down in a silo somewhere, and looking at his radar screens that were telling him to launch everything he had because the Americans had just done it preemptively. Moscow was calling, and he was on the line, and they were saying hit it, hit the button. He said, "Man, something's wrong. I don't like the way it looked." And then the system reset, and the Americans hadn't launched anything. And the really ironic thing about me telling that story is I can never remember the guy's name. Neither can anybody else. And there are no statues to him. We now know his story. He lived out his life as a retired colonel in the former Soviet Union, and he saved the entire world, all our asses, one man, refusing to hit. It's an extraordinary story. One of the most extraordinary things that's ever happened in all human history. And I'm going, is it Petrov? What's it? But you can Google around and you'll find his story. I'm not making it up. And so, yeah, well, geez, I'm losing it actually. I've been answering too many questions last week, so I'll pretend that I finished that one. I'll quickly take one more, and then I'll sign your books. Yes.
Can you say something about who and what you enjoy reading now?
Oh, well, if I could recommend one book right now, and I still haven't finished it myself, I would recommend The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. And I won't say anything about it, but if you can handle something that's really intense and is really going to put you through emotionally, that's an amazing piece of work. He's a super talented writer. Okay, I'm going to sign you.